The obvious thing that we've experienced as the biggest advantage for social media is that everything now happens in real time. There is no longer that linear process where a couple of smart people in your policy department think about what the world needs to do to change for the better, and then they pass something down to the geeky guy at the end of the corridor in comms who turns this into some sort of funky thing in cyberspace. It all happens in an integrated fashion, which is what Martin will talk about, and it can happen in real time. To me, that is a huge advantage. It equally is for big organizations quite a challenge. Amnesty International, you know, got lots of human rights lawyers. Our sign-off and approval processes are complex. You now have a bunch of campaigners who are out there shaping a campaign in real time as time develops. That is exciting, but at the same time requires you to pay really a lot of attention to what is happening there. It also means that your targets, whether it's a government, a company, is, if they're smart, equally quick in responding to your campaign initiatives, so that goes ahead. The second big thing, and I want to talk about that more maybe a little later, is the interactivity that is now available in this type of campaigning. We launched a project a year ago called Alt-Click, the alternative to clicktivism, which tries to crowdsource campaigning. We've reached out to activists and asked them to help us with human rights analysis, for example, by helping us to decode satellite imagery in places like South Sudan, where atrocities are happening on the ground. Hugely exciting, but at the same time, a big burden in terms of resources and managing that type of interactive process.
All organisations are becoming campaigning organisations in a sense, and I think what we're starting to see, I think, is the notion of campaigning now moving into the kind of corporate space. The idea of saying you can't simply just roll out standard stuff, basic information. You've got to have a belief in things. You've got to stand for something. And I think what's interesting, and in part the reason for writing the book, is clear there's a kind of dichotomy between those senior professionals who are very confident and competent in this space, who see themselves as campaigners, and probably the vast majority who are still kind of reticent. You know, only, we looked at the FTSE 100, only 7 chief executives in the FTSE 100 are on Twitter. So, you know, 93 have kind of gone, you know what, it's not for me, it's not right, whether it's, I'm not ready for it, or whether I'm, you know, the risk and reward quotient doesn't come through. So we're at this interesting kind of balance. I can say in 10 years' time, I think the balance will be very, very different. And I think the vast majority of senior people will be using social and will have to campaign.
Social media is not a silver bullet for all of your communications and engagement targets. You still have got to do the good old-fashioned power analysis, the good old-fashioned communication strategy, and your social media engagement is just part of that, the integration theme yet again. I absolutely hate it when people, you know, walk up to my digital engagement team and say, quick, you know, I've got this brilliant press release and now I need a social media graphic, and can you do me a 90-second video that goes on Twitter? And we go all the way back to the boring old template and try to say, you know, what is the objective, who are you trying to reach, and no, the general public doesn't exist. We've got to be better in defining audiences. And I think that is, just because we talked about money earlier, on the one hand, it is relatively easy to then measure impact that social media have, engagement scores, etc. But you've got to do much more sharpshooting as well. So I find myself carving out more budget for audience research in key markets before you start, you know, hammering out social media stuff. Spray and pray is not the right approach on anything in comms, and it certainly isn't for social media either. Getting together with your friends, with your fellow activists, with your fellow Amnesty members, in somebody's front room, in a church hall, in a classroom, and actually sit and physically write letters by hand, is that experience that you just don't get if you go to change.org or Avaz. And you know, the level and the quality of the engagement is just so much higher if you create these moments.